And just like that, on incredibly short notice, we have a couple of jumbled up fights on this UFC Paris card. Originally, you were supposed to have Taylor Lapilus taking on Muin Gafurov. Gafurov is out. Caolan Loughran supposed to debut against Yanis Ghemmouri. Ghemmouri ends up getting a big-time fight against a fellow French fighter in William Gomis. So ultimately, Double Impact returns to the UFC debut, or at least gets a return in a fight against the UFC debuting Kailyn Lochran. And this is a big-time fight at bantamweight. You guys know Taylor Lapilus. I know he was able to go out there in that first UFC run, go 3-1, and we don't often see fighters leave the promotion on a win, but that's what Taylor Lapilus was able to do. He was able to get wins over Rocky Lee, a big-time win over one of Matt's favorite fighters, Oka Sasaki. He ends up losing to Eric Perez in one of the stranger rounds to score that you've ever seen. Second round in that one, he lands the big shot. He drops Perez, and then he goes to pull guillotine to his detriment. So he ends up losing that round. It was kind of like Turbo Perez when he took on Jonathan Martinez. You get the knockdown, but it doesn't mean you win the round. And then, of course, Lapilus leaves the UFC on a win over Leandro Issa. So what's he been up to lately? And if you haven't been following, I mean, he's still been really heavily pushed in the French circles of MMA. He took on 22, 24, and 2 boxer Harry Adriato in a 4-round boxing fight just as soon as he left the UFC. Matt, Harry, he was 1,049 out of 1,265 internationally ranked boxers in that weight class. He was a very bad. But for Taylor Lapilus, good level competition in MMA since then. 7-1, the wins and the loss. He lost to New Stream's own Denis Lavrentiev, who's a really good fighter. New Stream, you know them for Koreshkov, Alexander Shlemenko, among others. But if you do look at it for Lapilus, I mean, the wins. He beats the gentleman Josh Hill, the Canadian with TKO in Quebec. He beats Nate Maness to win the belt. That guy, Taylor Lapilus, did he go to the body in that fight? Oh my gosh, did he ever? And then if you look at Lapilus's recent string, he's beating Wilson Hayes, former UFC title challenger at flyweight, as well as DeMarte Pena. And DeMarte, heck of a champ over at the UFC before he came to Aris. A couple of those championship fights are now no contest because banned substances, Matt. Banned substances. And in that fight against DeMarte Pena, it was the knees. It was a little bit of the body work that set him up to get a first-round finish and win that Aris FC strap. So Taylor Lapilus has been on fire. And we're going to talk quite a bit about Kailyn Lochran as well, because he's a big part of this equation. Out of Team Calbon, really good wrestling with Mike Grundy, really sketchy record at the start of his pro career, the Rhys Street fight, the Will Cairns fight. But regardless, if you just look at the first 5 fights as a pro for Kailyn Lochran, I mean, he's on a 10-fight win streak, amateur and pro. It wasn't really the greatest for those first 5. The last 3 are really good. He's able to completely dominate Luke Shanks in every respect of their matchup. He's able to go out there and have a ton of success his last time out against Italian Dylan Hazan. And that was open air in Rome for the title. And he's following in the footsteps of some big-time fighters like the Pikey, Brett Johns, Nathaniel Wood. A lot of good lineage that Cage Warriors has for those bantamweight champs. The only critique, though, for Lochran is you look at it for Shanks, you look at it for Hazan. Those 2 guys are blown up flyweights fighting at bantamweight. You could say the same thing for Lapilus having a win over Wilson Hayes. But this is a big step up now for Kailyn Lochran, taking this fight on short notice to go from Yanis Ghemmouri to Taylor Lapilus all of a sudden.
It is a big step up, but there's a couple of things that Lapilus does that I do think could get him caught, especially in this matchup. Because when you look at Lapilus, what really stands out? He's a rangy southpaw, right? He does a really good job at keeping his distance, but there's one thing he does that I don't like. And we talked about it a little bit with regards to Ciryl Gane in the main event this weekend. Ciryl Gane has great striking from the outside, but when he gets on the inside, he can get a little wild, right? We see those hooks go looping around. They're not the most technical strikes. And for Lapilus, when he closes the distance, he can get a little bit overzealous and start throwing some of those wider hooks. And if he does do that against Lochran, who is very able to shoot down for takedowns off of some of those entries, I could see him almost getting himself in trouble. But I'm really glad you bring up his body shots too, because from that position, that kick should be open to the body over and over again. Now, I'm not saying kicking Lochran is going to be the greatest idea ever, because yes, it is going to help him get the takedowns if he's able to catch the kick, but those are techniques that should be open throughout this matchup. But that's the one big thing that stood out to me. And I was going to bring this up when he was going to fight Muin Gafurov when that was the original matchup. Lapilus does does do a great job on the outside. He's good with his defensive submissions too. It's not like he's just some zero on the ground, but if he is on the bottom against a guy like Loughran, who does have the ground and pound that he has, and at least the ability to threaten with submissions, I'd put more emphasis on the ground and pound, really, because when he's able to get into that half guard, he's very heavy in the top position. We talked a lot about that in the original prediction. If he's able to do those things against Lapilus, I think he can have a lot of success. But Lapilus has good takedown defense, and that's the thing. His takedown defense outside the UFC is 81%. 81%. Those are good numbers right there. And if he is able to utilize not only takedown defense, what do we talk about all the time? Movement can also defend takedowns, because if your opponent's not able to get you up against the cage, or at least into some disadvantageous position, then it is going to be much more difficult for them to lock their hands around him. So I love this matchup as a fight. I think it should be a really entertaining one. We weren't as high on the original pick that we just did about Gomis and Ghemmouri, but I think this is going to be an entertaining fight for as long as it lasts. And I think this is a much better introduction for Loughran in the UFC, because if he beats Taylor Lapilus, okay, the average viewer who just watches the pay-per-view, maybe that doesn't mean anything to them. But to people like you and me who know how good Taylor Lapilus is, who know how skilled he is, I think that's a really big win that the Don could get in his UFC debut for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially if he is able to go out there, get that win, that's a giant feather in the cap for Caolan Loughran. And you go back and you watch these fights, and if we just focus on those last three, Cage Warriors 154, main event, Dylan Hazan, and they're in Italy against the Italian. He's able to go out there, and I mean, really low stance, really good counter left hands in that one. He ends up really just going out there with his strikes and getting things done. His fight against a Horlu, he was able to go out there super aggressive, get the double leg, get the takedown. Once it was down to the mat, he was able to finish it. And against Luke Shanks, I mean, he just dominated in every respect of that fight. So again, Loughran coming in, Gaelic football as a kid and a little bit of boxing, and he's been able to round things out very well at Team Calbon. And you've seen that gym. Mike Grundy, of course, who's been in the corner of Loughran in the past, but Darren Till's come out of that gym, Tom Aspinall as well. So a really big gym over there in Liverpool, getting things done. When we have a look at this matchup, Matt, I believe Taylor Lapilus is a pretty darn big favorite in this one now. We have a look at the Tapology votes, and they're really close. 153 total votes, 52% Lapilus, 48% Loughran in this one. So what's the pick in this fight?
It's a really difficult one to have a good pick on, like you say. The odds are a little bit skewed, but again, it's a fight where there's a lot of unknowns out there, right? Like if Loughran can just get that top position, and again, especially early on, use some of that ground and pound, it's going to take a lot of the sting out of Lapilus' shots, and it's going to make it a lot more difficult for him to get off those mid to long range attacks, because up close, I think both guys can have success. I mean, Lapilus is probably the more technical striker out of these two, but if Loughran can make it ugly, and again, disguise some of those takedown attempts as his strikes and vice versa, he could make it a really difficult fight for Taylor Lapilus. So I almost said I'm going to take the guy who's taking this fight on short notice, even though both guys were very much getting ready for fights this weekend. I'm going to go with Lapilus. I do think his ability to create that distance and maintain that distance is going to be really important. And again, if he gets taken down in that first round, it's going to completely change everything. But this is one of those fights that A, I think is in contention for fight of the night, and B, I think the first round is going to tell us who's going to win. If Lapilus can stay on the outside, land some of those knees up the middle, land some of those body attacks, especially leg kicks, I think he's going to have continued success in the second and third round as well. But if he gets taken down and beat up in that first round, we're probably just going to see a rinse and repeat for round 2 and round 3.
Yeah, Lapilus definitely has the opportunity that y'all must have forgot, even though y'all must have forgot I went 3-1 in the UFC. Most people can't boast that. And if you do look at Lapilus, he was supposed to debut last year, at least have the re-entry, taking on Khalid Taha, but he broke his left hand. He had an Instagram video just as soon as it happened, and he had like a little bit of a cast on it. So look out for Taylor Lapilus. He's been out of action for over a year now at this point, and a big shot in front of that kind of hometown crowd in Paris, France to get the win. I have Kailyn Lochran in the matchup. I think, again, like you said, I think the takedowns are going to be a little bit of a difference maker. I think that Taylor Lapilus is head and shoulders one of the better boxers that Caolan Loughran's probably ever faced. And Loughran's got good boxing in his own right. Both guys like to work into the body to then throw to the head. And distance will be a big thing, because we've seen it like in these Loughran fights. We might not have the exact metric on what his reach is, but it's not all that big from what you can see in the video. So for me, I do like Loughran in the matchup. We're in disagreement on the pick, but this is an awesome fight. I'm really glad that we had this one. I was looking forward to Gaffarov and Lapilus. I was looking forward to Loughran versus Ghemmouri, but now all of a sudden this is one of the more entertaining fights that we have in an absolute shark tank of a division that is bantamweight. So the jumbled up fights, you can find them here in the playlist. The individual thumbnails, they are out there, so make sure you check those out. You toss a leg on your way out, get this stuff trending. And we got some big time fights coming up this week. You're not going to want to miss any of it. Keep it locked in with Fight Nick Picks. We always say, let's get into it.